One question we frequently get is what it's really like to work with Gatehouse admissions and really what differentiates us. So I thought it would be great to talk to one of my colleagues, Rachel, about the process. Rachel, what is the experience? How does it unfold with your clients when you're working with somebody?
All right, it's a great question. Usually the process starts with some sort of introductory call. It could be a free consult, it could be kickoff call, it could be any number of things where we just sort of talk about what the process is going to be and give some sort of sense of expectation setting so the client kind of knows what's going to happen. But I would say the vast majority of the work, or kind of the bulk of the work, kicks off with the experience inventory. And that's a document that we have. Is this very comprehensive document. It's probably about 20 pages. It encompasses everything that the client wants to share about themselves. So it's goals, values, kind of talking through your childhood experiences, college.
Wait a second, you asked for childhood. Like, I feel like some people are like, why would you ask for childhood experiences? And I always say, it's like, those are the moments. Sometimes those are the moments that shape us. So much of those moments are like formative of where we grew up. Did we move around a lot? Were we in small town? Were we in a city? And those themes of family, upbringing, community are really important to understanding who an individual is.
Well, and that's where I think the experience inventory is so crucial, because rather than picking the themes that you want to share with business schools, it's not manufacturing it, but it's kind of being authentic. And I think that's actually one of the things that I think Gatehouse is really good at, is encouraging people to be themselves. So the idea is not about coming up with sort of like a story for admissions, but actually figuring out what in your own life makes you unique. And I think the experience inventory is really crucial for that. So, the client fills out this really detailed document, and then it allows both me and the client to see themes. And so to your point about childhood, a lot of those themes start way back at the beginning of your life, and you can kind of see these same things occur throughout somebody's life, these kind of like story arcs almost. And then the client has specific examples to point to. So rather than just saying, here's the theme that I want to share about myself, they're going to be kind of showing the admissions committee this theme. And I think that's one of the key things we always say to clients is you want to show, not tell. And I think the challenge is it can be so tempting to just tell the admissions committee what you want them to know. And the ideal thing is if you can use that experience inventory to kind of bubble up these stories that show that theme, it really resonates. And so at the end of kind of putting together all these aspects of the application, the client has really demonstrated these themes. And so the admissions committee can almost then say, okay, well, these are the 3 or 4 or 6 themes I see, rather than being told these are the themes that I want you to know.
Yeah, I find that very often when I do a free consultation, somebody will say, well, what do you see? What do you think my angle should be? I'm like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what your angle is going to be because I don't know you yet. And I always am like, slightly nervous but excited to open an experience inventory, because I never know, I can see somebody's resume, but that's the black and white. And then you start digging into the experience inventory. I mean, sometimes I'm just so inspired by our clients, sometimes even the most mundane stories when they've prevailed through all sorts of challenges or the relationships in their lives that matter. I feel very, sometimes amazed at how much our clients trust us. And I think all of us, I think you would totally agree, we take that trust super, that means a lot to us. And we feel this need to really do right by our clients. And the other thing that you said is how much like the experience inventory bubbles the stories up. I think sometimes our clients think, oh, I know this is my angle. I had this really important deal and I ran the books, or I was the one who wrote the LOI or whatever it might be. And that's what they think their strategy is going to be. But by working on the EI, you start to realize all these different colors, and they realize it too. And I always think that's a pretty nice aha moment.
Yeah, and I think the challenge is there can be a real temptation to shove all of the client's best stories, so kind of the places where they were most impactful. And there is a place for those, but particularly for the essays where they're asking about kind of what matters most, or kind of any of these ones where it's a theme around leadership or impact, it's like you want not necessarily the best stories, but those stories that most demonstrate that theme or that arc. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. For me, reading the experience inventory of a new client is absolutely the best part of my entire job. I mean, I enjoy, like you said, kind of the trust, but even mundane stories. I mean, people don't have to have crazy lives.
No.
Even just kind of understanding what somebody's life was like. It's like you get a window. It's almost like watching a movie. You get a window into somebody's life and kind of what motivates them and how they've become who they are. And there doesn't have to be some sort of major trauma or tragedy. It can just be kind of, somebody grew up in, like you said, rural or a city, or, maybe they grew up with their parents or not with their parents. Like, there's any number of things. And so it's just so interesting, the different ways that people's lives unfold. And we get kind of a front row seat to see it.
I know. And I can't imagine not having it. I can't imagine how we could really advise our clients if we didn't have this repository. I call it the book of you, like the book of our clients. I can't imagine trying to help them think about what stories. I think especially for, like, if you think about Harvard Business School and there are 3 questions. They have that growth-minded one, the curiosity one. I feel like that stumps so many of our clients. They're thinking about a time at work when they maybe did a task a little bit better than they should have. And I often go back to the experience inventory. And I'm like, wait a second, you mentioned that you've recently learned skiing. Like, tell me about that. Or tell me about how your relationship with your grandmother evolved. And pretty soon, it's like there's this whole discovery of something they were thinking about that shows curiosity and a growth mindset in a completely different way.
Well, and I'll say one additional thing about Harvard, about that particular essay, is I think the word curiosity sometimes throws people off.
100%.
Because their clients are like looking for some time when they were curious, but in a very narrow way.
Yeah.
And that's not what this essay is about. It's really about being open to new ways of thinking, to being challenged. So it doesn't always have to be that something went wrong, but often there can be some aspect of something where the client was trying to achieve something and they were forced to think about things in a different way, or the path wasn't always so smooth. And so it's kind of recognizing that growth minded isn't always just literally like taking on a new hobby or something that's so literal.
Yes.
But kind of being growth minded can take lots of different forms.
Which is why I really like HBS's essays. I think the first year, I don't know, when we were talking about the new essays and we're like, wait a second, what are these? These feel so narrow and there's so many parts of the prompt. What's going on here? And I've learned to love them because even though they're like, okay, growth-minded or leadership-focused or business-minded, there's so many different ways you can take them. And I think that's another thing, going back to the first thing that we talked about is how, what differentiates us when we work with clients. I think just helping them see how their stories can work together in one application, having them think through, okay, where these stories go. That's incredibly hard to do on your own. Not just, as you said, I think you're right, thinking about the prompt differently, but it's almost you need to think about the prompt differently for each of those prompts, and then you have to start being strategic about each one of them. Let me ask you what about the leadership-focused one? Thoughts on that essay, on how you approach it, and any strategies or ways that you find yourself gravitating towards?
So I'll start by saying I agree with you. I actually have grown to love HBS's essays, and I think the leadership one is interesting. So again, I think the challenge with it is clients can be very narrow-minded or specific in what they think leadership is.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, the question is about how you invest in others. And that is a really broad definition of leadership.
Yeah.
And so I think what can be really interesting is to kind of engage with clients and help them understand that leadership, back to this idea of like the best stories, leadership isn't always the biggest, shiniest examples,
right,
but it's really thinking about those experiences where you've learned the most or maybe grown. Sometimes those examples might be informal. Sometimes they might be small. Sometimes they might be big. You're leading a big team or having a huge impact. But sometimes leadership is really just one-to-one. Maybe you mentor one child whose life you've really changed because of that really close bond that you formed. And so that is what I love about that essay in particular, is just that leadership can be so broad and varied. And I think kind of back to kind of our point about getting to know clients, I think the experience inventory is an excellent place to surface some of those ideas, but it's just kind of pushing on people to really think about where are those experiences where they have grown and kind of learned what leadership means. And that can be very fulfilling to kind of learn about somebody and also to watch clients learn about themselves. Because that, I think, is kind of the challenge with this question, which I would say is probably one of the more introspective of the three of Harvard's questions, in terms of thinking about, not just what was the thing that you did and what was the result, but what was the learning, the growth, kind of the reflection on it. And so that's the part that I think, clients find challenging, but also kind of from my perspective is the most gratifying, is to actually watch people kind of think through these experiences and then learn something new about themselves.
Yeah. One strategy I often use when thinking about any of these is like challenge. Sometimes people think they have, okay, I led a team and it went really well and here are the impacts. And they think that's the story. But it's actually like, where did you stumble? What was hard? The accomplishments, the only accomplishments, the real leadership stories, those are the ones that test us. If it came at no cost, it's not going to be an interesting story. And I think often when we help clients see that, remember this idea of stumbling, of challenge, of perseverance, that's going to bubble up new kinds of leadership they haven't necessarily thought of. And I think that's really critical for all of these goals, but certainly HBS in this question.
But I think if we all think about our own lives, the most growth really comes from those hardships, right? Something doesn't go your way, or you're forced to think about something a different way, or, kind of just do things differently, and I said that to clients, I've had a number of clients over the years, maybe who had a startup that failed or some sort of other venture that didn't go the way they want, or even a deal didn't close, right? So it's sort of like a deal not closing is well out of your the realm out of your responsibility. Just because the deal didn't close doesn't mean that you didn't do great work. So I think it's kind of helping clients to understand that actually failure is a great place to learn things. And so, it's kind of back to what we were talking about with that kind of growth-minded essay, that actually not getting what you want or kind of being challenged is a great way to grow. And so helping people, I think, be more expansive in thinking about all of these aspects, whether it's, being growth-minded or being a leader or whatever else it is. It's really, trying not to be cookie cutter and not think about it so much as what the school is looking for, but rather thinking about what is kind of my special sauce, what makes me unique, and then presenting that.
So you just mentioned, what are the schools looking for? So what's HBS looking for in that first essay question, the business-minded one? How do you tackle that with your clients?
So actually, this is my favorite question, and I'll share my thoughts. I'm curious to hear yours, but to me, the question, kind of the underlying question is, what's the impact that you want to have, right? This is for the client, kind of, sort of, it's about kind of the different things in their experience that have taken them to this place. But the question is, what's the impact, right? What's the space that they want to take up? If you kind of look forward, kind of what's your reason for business school? But kind of like how, it's kind of like, how is business school going to help you? But not necessarily in the literal, like, how is it going to help you get this next job or achieve these goals? It's more broadly like, if you think about kind of a legacy or, something like that, sort of like, what's the impact that you want to be having? So from my view, I always think about that and kind of, and again, the experience inventory is a great way to kind of surface some of that, but sort of thinking about, where is that taking us? And then almost thinking about, okay, what are the experiences that the client has had that has helped them formulate that idea? Right. So, it may be similar to kind of the literal experiences that they've had that have taken them to the job that they have now, but it's almost thinking more broadly, like, what's shaped their worldview in that way.
Yeah, I think one piece of something that helps me help clients is I say, write about what inspires you, because that actually always makes for a better read, right? If you are writing about the problems that inspire you, the things that you want to go fix, and you think about that and then write this essay, it's always going to feel a little bit less like, here are my career goals and exactly how it all ties, and it feels like you're fighting for something much bigger. And I think that often when I share that with my clients, they feel empowered too. I think there's been so many, you need to know your career goals. It's all got to be rock solid and logical. And look, the schools, HBS, all the schools, they're placing bets on those people who are going to succeed. So I understand why this viewpoint is out there, but I think it, pigeonholes people. And so that's what I try to encourage them, focus on your inspiration.
And I would say that's really good advice, not just for HBS, but just for applications in general.
Yeah.
So, I know we've talked about kind of the free consults that we do and sort of, people trying to figure out how to, improve their application or their profile. Prospective clients will say, okay, well, how should I spend my time? And it's like, well, how would you enjoy spending your time?
Yeah.
So rather than thinking about the things that you think the admissions committee wants you to be doing, what inspires you? What would, what's the impact that you want to have in terms of, in your community? Do you play tennis? Maybe you want to go volunteer with a youth tennis league, or you are a consultant. Maybe you want to join NY Pace and volunteer in that way. So it's sort of thinking about, spending your time in ways that you really enjoy it. And in fact, I had a client not so long ago who loved running, and we talked about how she might engage with that. She was located in New York, and she actually volunteers as a guide runner for the blind.
Achilles.
Incredible, right?
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, we were kind of like brainstorming different ideas, and it's like, that's actually something where it kind of harnesses multiple passions that she has, and what a special way to give back that isn't what everybody's doing. But the reason why it's not what everybody's doing is because it's so specific to her interests.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of idea of inspiration is one that it's just, I wish clients and kind of everybody applying wouldn't be so afraid of doing the right thing, and instead just figuring out, it's your best path to business school is what you want to do, not what the other person who got in last year has done.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's like, if you actually follow your inspiration, that is what is going to be most effective for getting in at business school.
Absolutely. And it's going to be the most interesting for the admissions committee to read.
But here's the thing. I think it's great now when people ask me what to do in the community. I mean, I have a Rolodex that's a mile long, and I learn about everything from our clients. You just spoke about NY Pace. One of the board members of NY Pace is like, hello, Liza. There have been a number of people that come to NY Pace from Gatehouse admissions. Thank you very much for suggesting it. And I love it because people do. They're like, they'll ask, I'm sure the same happens to you. They ask in our free consultations, just as you said, what should I do? That's like one of my favorite brainstorming exercises. I look at the resume and start saying, have you thought about, you like horseback riding? Have you ever thought about therapeutic horseback riding likely there's a barn nearby and you can do riding. Rowing, I know you were a rower. There's like Row NYC. There's even just, is it reaching back out to the school where you rode at and just being a mentor for the younger athletes. There's so many ways to get involved.
Well, it's funny because I always think about kind of low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And so it's like, yes, you want to follow your inspiration, but so I think the recommendations vary by person, but the easiest ways to get involved in things that interest you are to reconnect to things that either are your hobbies or maybe you did before. So I always kind of, to your point about scanning resumes, I always look back to what somebody was involved in college.
Yeah.
So maybe you were on the board of an organization. Well, why don't you think about re-engaging as an alumni advisor, or set up an alumni group for people who've graduated, or maybe you want to go back and set up mock interviews, or kind of any other way to give back. But I always think going back to something that where you've enjoyed your experience is a great way to get involved. And so the obvious are to go back to college. We talked about hobbies. The other thing is at work, right?
Yeah.
Getting involved in mentoring, recruiting, onboarding, training, right? All these things, maybe you went through training and you think there's some gaps and you see an opportunity to fix it, or whatever else it might be. So, it's not that there's, and again, no right answer, but just trying to think through, where would you most enjoy making your mark?
Yeah. And, two other strategies I recommend is often thinking about how, and what I always say is, when you leave an organization, how will it be better? How will you have improved it? And one of the things I suggest is like thinking about surveys. So survey the experience, or start thinking about who's going to take over when you leave. And people are always like, oh yeah, like maybe they're organizing. I have a client who's organizing a firm-wide volunteer day. And I said, one thing you should do is survey every single participant to figure out how you could have done it better, and then provide that information for the person who does it the next year. So the reality is people, I understand you're going to business school, it's a professional degree, but they underestimate how important this sort of personal stories, this outside your resume stuff really is. It's a rare way that you can demonstrate and show the schools your leadership. So take every advantage of it.
Yeah, well, I think it's two things. So first of all, if you look at how many schools' essays ask how you're going to contribute, right?
Yeah.
It's directly related, right? What is the space that you're going to take up in the community, in terms of the things that you're going to be involved in and how you're going to give back. But I also think it's kind of more basic. I always say to clients, like, is anybody going to want to sit down and like have a coffee with you, have a beer with you? Like, yes, you're all these things on paper, but if you come across as extremely robotic, no, who's going to want to have a beer with you?
Yeah.
And the admissions committee is thinking about that, right? Because they've got the choice between you and somebody who's got the same stats as you, but that other person comes across as this kind of engaging, interesting person who's dynamic, who's going to support their classmates. I mean, that's the key thing, right? Is, how are you going to involve yourself in the community? And that's not always just the literal, like, I'm going to set up a panel on this. And it's not always also the literal, people say, oh, well, I'm going to help my classmates if they can't figure out how to do the problem
Finance.
sets. Yeah. It's like, well, but it's just more broadly, like kind of, how are you going to be as maybe you're going to hold the door open for your classmates? I mean, it can be really small things. So I think that's the key thing, is to kind of think about all these kind of small and informal ways that we are part of the communities that we are part of.
Stanford. It is.
What's not to love?
I mean, it's a hard application.
It is hard.
It's a hard application. I mean, the amount of time my clients spend on their GSB application dwarfs any other school, including like HBS or Wharton.
Yeah.
And I mean, I spend more time on GSB applications than any other school as a result. So talk to me a little bit about advice, strategies. It's always great to, you and I love this. I love hearing how what my peers do, how they try to do it. And obviously I like sharing what I do as well. So talk to me a little bit about how you tackle Stanford. Any tips or strategies?
So I think, the good news about Stanford is it's a really long application. And whereas I think in other applications, it can feel like for an applicant, like they haven't had space to share enough about themselves as they would like, that you're kind of cherry picking. The good news about Stanford's application is that actually most applicants will really feel like they've been able to share kind of the full picture of who they are, their key accomplishments, and all, and kind of that. So I think that's kind of the good news story. In terms of kind of approaching the different aspects of it, I think back to this kind of question about introspection, right, which we talked about, and kind of this, what I would say, certainly the first essay, what matters most to you, this is a place where the experience inventory is hugely, hugely valuable in terms of, again, surfacing themes. So rather than manufacturing it, you can kind of look through a client's life history and kind of see those themes.
Yeah.
And then again, think about the examples that bubble them up. But I would say, from my view, the set of essays that I like the most are the impact ones, right? I think they're very short, and so the client has to be really to the point. And oftentimes in the early stages, a client might write like a really nice little essay, and you think, okay, but this is a great story, but there's no impact here, right? This doesn't fit. It has to be hard hitting, and that impact doesn't always have to be at work. It might be kind of an impact on yourself, right? So it can be reflective, but really thinking about having a succinct and clear impact. So that's kind of my favorite piece of the application. But I think the key thing in terms of a tip, I guess, is recognizing that lots of the pieces could fit in different places. And I think that's true of a lot of the applications, right? Same thing I would say about Sloan, maybe HBS, right? There's stories that could fit in multiple places. And it might be that you develop them in one place, and then a couple of drafts in, you decide that they belong someplace else. But I would say with Stanford, it's like thinking about the application as a whole. And so that means kind of recognizing that things can move around, but also that, depending on what the client talks about and what matters most, might affect which examples they want to pick in their impact essays, right? That you want to give this balanced picture. It's not all work. It's not all outside of work, right? It's not all college. So kind of trying to almost think about it as a puzzle piece. And that's true of all the applications, I would say. But maybe a little bit easier to do with Stanford because there's so many parts, but really trying to make sure that you have this kind of full mosaic of somebody's life.
Yeah.
But I'll turn it to you. What would you say what's your favorite part or any tips?
Well, I have like a million comments on everything you just said. Number one, what you just said is like this mosaic and picture, and it's like, you're not a one-trick pony, and the schools don't want them. So sometimes you have GSB, you'll have, okay, I got to just show all these deals I've done. I keep mentioning deals just because we work with so many folks in private equity, and yeah, we understand you can do deals. Maybe one of those impact essays about that, but you're so, you have multiple dimensions. Let's show more of who you are in these essays. I also love the impact essays just because I feel like there are different parts of this process that challenge different parts of my brain. And I love the impact essays. They are so tight, as you said, and to really use every character. It's not quite like a puzzle or a crossword puzzle, but it's to me, it's always like a puzzle. How can you tell this story in just, they say no longer about 200 words. It's really closer to about 170 or 160 words, 1,200 characters to the dot, and like really making the most out of every one of those characters. I just find it a really fun exercise to embark on with my clients. With the what matters most, I mean, you and I, we know this, and everybody at Gatehouse, like we're often treating essays because it's always good to get someone else's eyes on them. And I have to say, there was one, and I won't reveal too many details about it. Our client privacy is always, very important to us, but one that you recently shared with me, an adversarial situation when the client was, I think it was in college, and how that situation really empowered him to make some changes and to really embrace who he was. And it was such an inspiring essay. So, it's hard to tease those things out. Yeah. And it is really about cutting through all the noise, digging deep into what really matters and letting the client write to that. And we'll always play devil's advocate. We'll always be the guardrail saying, all right, you're writing about this. You actually have no support for it. The thing that matters most to me is climate change. When the person has no work in climate and has never touched it, not believable. But other than that, our goal is to bubble up, to support, and let them be themselves. So I think, I love that essay just because I'm always proud of our clients for being vulnerable, for being raw, and letting the schools, letting GSB in as they do with that essay.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think the challenge with that essay is you cannot write it if you're not going to be introspective. And actually, I've had, over the years, however many clients, like just that is the essay that people struggle the most with.
Yes.
Because whereas some of the other essays you can get through with just the facts, ma'am.
Yeah.
There's no such way to do that. With Stanford, you just simply can't produce an essay that has any weight to it. And so I think clients always struggle. It is the most challenging, but therefore, kind of to your point, the most rewarding when it comes together. And when clients, you can often sometimes see like a switch that gets flipped. Even with, I would say the same thing is true with HBS, right? That point where you kind of realize that actually it's not about the trite answer, like actually, how did you grow?
Yeah.
How have you invested in others? What is the impact? What does matter most? Right? All of these are about being honest. And so, you can sometimes see several drafts in, finally the client gets that that's what they need to do in order to let the admissions committee into who they are. And that's what the admissions committee is asking for. And, we talk about this all the time. Some schools are not asking for that, right? There are some sets of applications or sets of essays where the school doesn't want to know that.
Yeah, much more practical in nature, much more
and I would
pragmatic.
say an example being Wharton, right?
Yep.
Very matter of fact, hard in its own way, but Wharton is not striving to understand who you are.
Right.
But for those schools that want to know that, you have to give it to them.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was fascinated to learn about from a former reader at GSB is that they read what matters most last. And I always think of it as this big behemoth. It is, and a lot of my energy and a lot of our clients' energy is focused on that because, as we said, it's such a hard essay to write. And so it was really interesting to me that they read it last. And what does that change? I think the big thing, and it's nothing, this we've always said, you don't want to repeat the same themes. You don't want to rehash your essay. But I think the fact that they read it last just underscores that. It makes our job easier, this coaching part of really do not rehash your essay. Tell them something about who you are that they can't see. Give them that color and that those real deep moments of you and who you are, and really just try not to be anybody else. Just be yourself, which is I mean, it's incredibly hard. Do as I say, not as I do. But that is important.
Yeah, and I would say the challenge with writing that essay, and we kind of alluded to it already, but is there can be a real tendency for the client to think, okay, I want to write an essay that includes my 3 or 4 best stories.
Yes.
And so then it's like, I got to like squeeze these in. And so then either the thesis doesn't make sense, or it's not correct, or it can kind of go wrong in all these different ways. But it's like, actually, very often I would say a good what matters most, that thesis might not be backed up by any of a client's best stories. Right. Those might fit into the impact essay or the background essay. And so actually that story of who you are might just be these simple stories of kind of experiences that you've had, places where you've learned, but they're not necessarily the heavy hitting, the deals where you did this, or you know, the big leadership experience. They might be kind of the smaller, quieter moments in somebody's life. And so I think the more that people can realize that it's not a compilation of your best stories and kind of let go of that, the better off they'll be.
Right. If they wanted the compilation of the best, most impressive stories, they would ask for it.
Yeah.
I do have to say, one of my clients this past round, we worked together, actually round 1 and round 2, we worked together on 4 or 5 different schools. And at the last minute, he decided to put an application into GSB. And by this point, we had worked on just about every story except the what matters most, because we didn't work together on that school. He decided to go for it on his own. And he got an interview. Fingers crossed, we'll see what happens. But I think he was like, you know, all the work we did together, it just made me be free to write about what was really important. And of course I was like, what did you write about? And when he said it, I was like, yep, that's you. You got it. Like, and so, you know, I was delighted to do the mock interview and to work and support this person all the way up until then. And you know, just even him having the guts to write what matters most to you, I was like, yes, that's exactly the way it should work. And that's what GSB wants to.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing is to realize that the key, which we've kind of alluded to, is to give the schools what they want and what they ask for. And I would say this is kind of like another common pitfall that clients have, or kind of when we do these free consults, same thing, which is clients have certain stories that they want to share. And they kind of like pigeonhole them in. And it's like, that's not the answer to the question.
Right.
And so as a consultant, it can be very frustrating, but you're really trying to guide somebody to answer the question that you were asked. These schools spend a lot of time figuring out what questions they want to ask, and they change them from year to year. And they change the amount of space you have to answer the question, right? So I think that's kind of the big piece of advice I have for clients always is like,
always start with
read the question, make sure you're answering it, and like go back, you know, write your first draft, but then go back and look at the question, make sure you've answered it, because it can be really tempting to just tell a story and the story has nothing to do with the question that they were asked.
I always say, like, you're not helping yourself. It's even when I do mock interviews, when I ask a question, and I get it, you want to sell yourself, so you bubble up a story that is maybe not answering the question, but that actually makes it so much harder for the interviewer to follow what's going on. It's the same thing with writing. If you're writing an answer to another essay question, you've already lost the reader, because they're like, wait, this is not what I'm looking for, so I don't have a mental roadmap of where this is going. I don't know why you're telling me.
Yeah, and it's frustrating to your point, right? If you ask a specific question, if you're the admissions reader, you're thinking, well, I could have asked it, you know, we could have asked a different question, but we didn't. Answer the question. So I think that would be my big piece of advice is, you know, you might add additional pieces if you have space. And some essays, you know, we talked a little bit about Columbia's first essay. Actually, it's very long for the questions that they ask, right? So you can potentially tuck some extra stuff in there. But you've got to make sure that the bulk of whatever your answer is responds to the prompt, because there's a reason why that's the prompt.
So we could continue talking for hours and hours. You put 2 consultants who love what they do together, and we're just going to keep talking. Rachel, thank you very much. Thanks, it's just such a pleasure. As we both know, we work so closely with our clients, so it's nice to take a step back and talk about our craft. For any of our viewers today, give us a chance to talk to you. You can tell we love what we do, so I encourage you to reach out to Gatehouse Admissions, learn more about your candidacy and your strategy for applying to business school.